He saw the rifle first, a ghost that shouldn't exist in his armory. Then he saw the marks scored into its barrel, each one a life taken from an impossible distance. His hand went to his sidearm. A confrontation was inevitable. The air inside Vanguard Air Base's weapons vault was cold, sterile, and smelled of ozone and chilled metal. It was less an armory and more a sanctuary, a place where the instruments of war were treated with the reverence of surgical tools. Colonel Julian Thorne liked it that way. Order was his creed, and here, order was absolute. Gleaming racks of standard-issue M4S and sidearms stood in perfect alignment under the harsh, shadowless glare of overhead LED panels. The low, constant hum of the climate control system was the only sound, or it was supposed to be. Thorne paused, his polished boots silent on the sealed concrete floor. His inspection of the inventory logs was a weekly ritual, a meticulous process of checks and balances that grounded him. But a sound, alien to this controlled environment, had just snagged his attention. It wasn't the clang of dropped equipment or the rattle of a loose rack. It was a soft, rhythmic shing click, followed by the whisper of oiled cloth on metal. It was a sound of care, of intimacy, and it was utterly out of place. His eyes, sharp and accustomed to scanning horizons for threats, now scanned the cavernous room. They swept past a junior airman cataloging ammunition crates, past the rows of inert, waiting steel, and settled on a solitary figure tucked away in a far corner. At a stainless steel workbench, usually reserved for calibrating advanced optics, sat Sergeant Alara Vance. He knew her file. 30 years old, an exemplary record as a weapons technician. Quiet, efficient, almost invisible. She was the kind of soldier who blended into the background, her presence as unassuming as the hum of the ventilation. Her flaxen gold hair was pulled back into a tight, severe braid that fell between her shoulder blades, not a single strand out of place. Her frame, which in standard fatigues looked merely slender, was coiled in concentration, revealing an underlying architecture of lean, dense muscle. She was a tightly wound spring, even at rest. She was bent over a rifle, its long, tungsten gray form alien amongst the familiar black and tan of U.S. military hardware. Thorne's mind, a catalog of NATO weaponry, immediately flagged it. The silhouette was wrong. The barrel was too heavy, the stock too customized. It was a TC-50, he realized, but one that had been profoundly and expertly modified. It was a ghost, a weapon with no place on his inventory sheets. A prickle of unease, cold and sharp, traced its way up his spine. This wasn't just an unauthorized weapon. In his vault, it was a heresy. He started forward, his steps measured, deliberate. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who had spent a decade hunting things that did not want to be found. As he closed the distance, the details of Vance's work came into focus. Her hands moved with a surgeon's precision, disassembling the bolt with deft, economical motions. She wasn't just cleaning the rifle. She was communing with it. Then he saw them. Just forward of the receiver, scored deep into the cold, gray metal of the barrel, was a row of tally marks. They weren't neat. They were carved with a grim finality, each line a declaration. Thorne stopped breathing. He didn't need to count them. He knew what they were. Each mark was a life. Each scar on the metal was a story that ended in a pinpoint of impact from a place no one saw coming. His training, his instincts, his entire being screamed threat. His hand dropped to the butt of his Sig Sauer P320. The click of the holster's retention strap being released was unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness of his approach. Sergeant, his voice was low, a blade of sound meant to cut through her concentration. Stand up. Step away from the weapon. Now, Alara Vance did not flinch. She did not startle. The rhythmic motion of her hands paused for a single, infinitesimal second before resuming, as if his command were nothing more than a draft of air. The defiance was absolute, and it was silent. The cold unease in Thorne's gut hardened into a block of ice. This wasn't insubordination. This was something else entirely. He was no longer a colonel addressing a sergeant. He was a man confronting an enigma, and the ghost in her hands held all the answers. The charged silence in the vault stretched thin, threatening to snap. The few other personnel in the vast room had frozen, their routine tasks forgotten. They were now spectators to a drama they didn't understand, a silent, high-stakes standoff between the base's unwavering pillar of authority and a quiet technician who had just ignored a direct order at gunpoint. "Vance, I will not say it again." Thorne's voice dropped even lower, losing its parade ground command and taking on the lethal edge he reserved for combat. The barrel of his pistol remained pointed at the floor, but his intent was unmistakable. Finally, Elara Vance stopped her work. She placed a small, oiled brush on the workbench with deliberate care, its click echoing in the stillness. Slowly, she turned her head, her gaze meeting his. Her eyes were a pale, clear gray, like a winter sky. There was no fear in them, no defiance. There was nothing at all. It was the most unnerving thing Thorne had ever seen. After a moment that felt like an eternity, she turned back to the rifle. Frustration, hot and sharp, pricked at Thorne's composure. This was a calculated rejection of his authority, more potent than any shouted insult. He refused to let her control the situation. "Airman," he barked, his voice cracking like a whip. "Give me the serial number on that weapon." A young airman, pale and wide-eyed, scurried forward. He cautiously approached the bench, giving Vance a wide berth, as if she were a venomous snake. He leaned in, squinting at the receiver. "Colonel, I'm reading it now." He rattled off the alphanumeric sequence, his voice trembling slightly. "Run it," Thorne commanded, his eyes never leaving Vance. The frantic clatter of keys on a nearby terminal filled the void. The seconds dragged on. The airman stared at his screen, his brow furrowed in confusion. He retyped the number. The result was the same. "Sir," he finally said, turning from the monitor, "there's no match. The database says the weapon doesn't exist." The words hung in the air, a confirmation of the impossible. A ghost. A piece of hardware with no history, no paper trail, no official life. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the vault's temperature. His gaze was drawn back to the rifle, past the grim tally marks, to a small, intricate emblem etched into the stock, just below the cheek rest. It was a crescent moon, its sharp horns partially eclipsing a single, brilliant star. The image struck Thorne with the force of a physical blow. His mind was thrown back 8 years, to a secure briefing room deep in the Pentagon. He remembered a file, thicker than his wrist, stamped with more warnings than nuclear warhead. Operation Nightfall Weaver. The after-action report was a masterpiece of obfuscation. Entire pages blacked out, key details redacted into nonsense. It spoke of a mission gone sideways, a special forces team hopelessly pinned down, and an impossible extraction. But buried in the appendices, mentioned only once, was the asset that had single-handedly turned a massacre into a miracle. There was no name, no rank, only a call sign, Nix 1, and beside the call sign, drawn by the mission planner in a moment of what Thorne could only assume was awe, was a small, hand-sketched emblem. A crescent moon eclipsing a single star. He looked from the ghost rifle to the quiet woman with winter-gray eyes. The unassuming technician, the silent non-entity. He was staring a living legend, a phantom who wasn't supposed to exist, holding a weapon that officially never had. The tally marks weren't just a kill count. They were the footnotes to a history that had been deliberately and violently erased. The simple inventory check had just detonated, and Colonel Julian Thorne was standing at ground zero. The woman in front of him wasn't just insubordinate. She was a classified secret, a walking breach of national security who had been hiding in plain sight, right under his nose. And he had just threatened her. Clear the vault. Thorne's voice was a low growl, the command absolute. Everyone, out, now. The order broke the spell. The other soldiers, grateful for an escape from the suffocating tension, moved with a hurried efficiency. Racks were secured, tools were put away, and in less than a minute, the vast space was empty. Thorne strode to the heavy steel door, the pneumatic hiss as it sealed shut sounding like a final, definitive punctuation mark. They were alone. He holstered his pistol, the click of the weapon seating echoing the finality of the door. The dynamic had shifted. This was no longer about military discipline. It was about the ghost in his vault. "Operation Nightfall Weaver," he said, the words feeling heavy and dangerous on his tongue. Khyner Province. 8 years ago, a SEAL team was about to be wiped off the map. Their Overwatch was eliminated. Their exfil route was compromised. Then, over the course of 17 minutes, 12 high-value targets, occupying fortified positions, were neutralized from a distance the Pentagon still classifies as statistically improbable. The mission report was a ghost story, but it had a name. Nix 1. Alara Vance remained silent, her back to him. She picked up a soft cloth and began to polish the rifle scope, her movements once again measured and calm. She was erasing his words from the air, just as she erased her targets from the earth. The emblem on that stock, Thorne pressed, stepping closer. The kill count. It all points to you. So I'm going to ask you again, Sergeant. Who are you? And what the hell are you doing in my armory? Before she could answer, a klaxon shattered the silence. A piercing, frantic shriek tore through the vault, accompanied by the flashing of red emergency strobes. It wasn't a drill. It was the high-priority, base-wide alert for an active combat emergency. A voice, strained with urgency, crackled over the PA system. All command staff to the ops center, immediate. All available QRF units, scramble. We have a situation at Sentinel's Peak. Recon Team Delta is pinned down, taking heavy fire. I repeat, Delta Team is ambushed and taking casualties. The words hit Thorne like a spray of shrapnel. Sentinel's Peak, a notorious stretch of jagged, unforgiving mountains that served as the training area's hostile border. It was a sniper's paradise and an infantryman's hell, a place where a handful of well-positioned fighters could hold off a battalion. Thorne instinctively reached for the comm unit on his vest, the tactical part of his brain overriding everything else. He could already hear the chaotic crosstalk from the command post. Can't get a fix on the shooter's position. He's too high. Air support is a no-go. The wind shear in those canyons is too severe. They're being cut to pieces. They have no cover. The intel was grim, painting a picture of a perfect kill box. The enemy had the high ground, dominant and untouchable. The recon team was trapped, their fate being sealed with every passing second. All the rules, all the protocols, all the carefully constructed order of his world had just been rendered meaningless by a hail of unseen bullets. He looked at Alara Vance. She had finally turned from the workbench, her head tilted slightly, her gray eyes distant. She was listening, not just to the alarm, but to the frantic symphony of the battle unfolding miles away. Her face, previously a mask of calm indifference, now held a flicker of something else, analysis. She was running the tactical calculations in her head, dissecting the problem with a cold, terrifying clarity. The choice before Thorne was stark and immediate. He could follow protocol, detain the ghost in his vault, and watch his soldiers die on a holographic map. Or he could embrace the heresy. He could trust the legend. He made his decision. He walked back to the workbench, his boots heavy on the concrete. He didn't speak. He simply reached out and picked up the TAC-50. The weapon felt unnaturally balanced in his hands, heavy with the weight of its unspoken history. He traced the cold line of the barrel, his thumb brushing against the grim tally marks. He was holding a myth. He turned and faced her, his eyes searching hers for a sign, for anything. "A recon team," he said, his voice raw, stripped of all rank. "They're trapped on the peak. The enemy sniper is in an impossible position. They're going to be wiped out." Vance said nothing. She simply stared back, her expression unreadable. Thorne held the rifle out to her. The weight of the moment, of the lives hanging in the balance, was a physical presence between them. "This is not an order, Sergeant Vance," he said, his voice laced with a desperation he hadn't felt in years. "This is a request. A Hail Mary. If you're who I think you are, if you were Nix 1, then I'm asking you to prove it. Not for me. For them." Alara Vance looked at the rifle Thorne held out to her. Her gaze was steady, assessing. For a long, silent moment, The only sound was the distant, frantic echo of the base alert. Then, without a word, she reached out and took the TAC-50. The instant her fingers wrapped around the worn grip, a transformation occurred. It was subtle but absolute. The quiet, unassuming weapons technician vanished. In her place stood a predator. Her posture shifted, her shoulders settling as the familiar weight was accepted. The blankness in her eyes was replaced by a razor-sharp focus that seemed to see through the walls of the vault, all the way to the wind-scoured peaks miles away. Her hands moved in a blur of practiced, economical motion. She racked the bolt, listening to the solid, reassuring clack of the mechanism. Her thumb checked the magazine release. Her fingers danced over the elevation and windage knobs on the scope, calibrating them from memory. It was a silent, deadly ballet of expertise, a ritual performed countless times in places that didn't appear on any map. Then she turned and walked towards the vault door. She didn't look back. She offered no nod of assurance, no word of promise. She simply moved, her purpose a tangible force that seemed to part the air before her. She was a weapon that had just been aimed. Thorne was left alone in the echoing silence, the red emergency lights painting his face in stark relief. He had just broken every rule in the book, entrusting the lives of his men to a ghost he'd met less than an hour ago. The fate of Delta Team and the fragile secret of Nix, one, now rested on the shoulders of a single, silent markswoman. Outside the vault, the base was a hive of organized chaos. Vance moved through it like a phantom, ignoring the shouts and the running soldiers. She bypassed the motor pool, heading instead for a small, unmarked gate at the far perimeter, one that led directly into the rugged backcountry. She knew the terrain. She knew the shortcuts. The mountains loomed ahead, their jagged peaks tearing at the belly of a hazy, midday sky. From the base, they looked almost serene. Vance knew better. Beauty in places like this was a lie, a thin veneer over a foundation of violence. Every ridge was a potential ambush point, every shadow a hiding place. She moved with a ground-eating stride, the TC-50 now slung across her back, its weight a familiar comfort. Her eyes were constantly in motion, scanning, measuring, calculating. Angles of approach, fields of fire, potential cover. Her mind was a tactical map, processing the landscape in a language of distance and elevation. Far below the ridgeline, the sounds of the battle reached her, fractured echoes of gunfire, the heavy, rhythmic thumping of a machine gun. The comms in her ear crackled with the desperate voices of Delta Team. Pinned. They've got us locked down from the northeast crest. Charlie's hit. I need a medic. Then another sound cut through the chaos. The deep, resonant crack of a heavy caliber rifle, distinct from the others. That was their sniper, the one holding all the cards. She signaled the small quick reaction force team that Thorne had ordered to follow her to halt at the base of a steep, treacherous incline. This is as far as you go, she said, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. They obeyed without question, recognizing the absolute certainty in her tone. This was a place for specialists, and she was in a class of her own. Then, she began to climb. The slope was a nightmare of loose shale and fractured rock. Each step was a calculated risk, each handhold tested before she committed her weight. The rifle remained slung, her hands free to grip the jagged protrusions of stone. Higher and higher she went, the air thinning, her breathing a steady, controlled rhythm. From this new, elevated angle, she could see them. A small cluster of uniforms pressed against a wall of rock, trapped, and nearly a kilometer above them, on a commanding perch, the enemy. At the very top, behind a natural shield of granite, she saw it, the faint, flickering glint of a scope. Their sniper, dug in patient and utterly dominant. She found her own perch, a small, natural depression in the rock that offered both cover and a stable firing platform. She unslung the TAC-50. The movement was fluid, silent, born of muscle memory forged in the crucible of real-world combat. She unfolded the bipod, planting its feet firmly into the gritty stone. The stock settled against her shoulder as if it were a part of her own body. She was home. The world narrowed to the circular frame of the scope. Through the powerful optics, the enemy position resolved into sharp, terrifying detail. Heat shimmer made the air dance, but Alara's focus cut through the distortion like a laser. She could see the enemy sniper, a figure swathed in camouflage, methodically scanning the kill zone below. Wind speed, negligible. Elevation adjustment, 2 clicks up. Distance, 1,048 meters. Her breathing slowed, each inhale drawn deep in her diaphragm. Each exhale a controlled, steady release. Her heartbeat was a slow, heavy drum in her ears. Her finger brushed the trigger, taking up the slack. The world outside the scope ceased to exist. There was only the reticle, the target, and the space between. Then a single, sharp crack split the mountain air. The recoil was a brief, violent handshake against her shoulder. In a magnified view of the scope, the enemy sniper's head snapped back as if pulled by an invisible string. His body crumpled, folding bonelessly behind his rock shield. First domino down. She immediately shifted her aim, her eyes hunting for the next threat. The enemy fighters below, momentarily confused by the cessation of their sniper's fire, realized something was wrong. Their response was a furious, indiscriminate hail of bullets in her general direction. Rounds smacked into the stone around her, kicking up angry clouds of granite dust. Rock splinters, sharp as glass, bit at her exposed cheek. She rolled sideways, flattening herself against the slope, making her silhouette as small as possible. The layered sound of automatic rifles and the deeper thump of a machine gun created a wall of noise. And then it came, the shot that nearly ended her. She caught it first as a flicker in her peripheral vision, the tiniest glint of light from a secondary ridge, a place she hadn't yet cleared. Her instincts screamed a warning a fraction of a second before her conscious mind could process the threat. She dropped her head, a purely reflexive action. The supersonic crack of the bullet passing was simultaneous with the searing heat it left in its wake. It passed so close she felt its pressure wave against her skin, a burning whisper that lifted strands of her hair. It was the voice of death, and it had missed by less than an inch. Her body reacted without thought, pivoting towards the source of the shot while she was still on the ground. A second hostile marksman was positioned in a narrow cut in the rock face, his rifle already braced for a follow-up shot. Her reticle found him just as he was settling back into his own scope. For the briefest of instants, their eyes met through layers of glass and a kilometer of air. It was a moment of lethal intimacy. She squeezed the trigger. His rifle bucked from his hands as the round hit him center mass. His body folded forward, tumbling into the dust. She didn't stop to watch him fall. The fight wasn't over. Below, Delta Team was moving, seizing the precious seconds her shots had bought them. She tracked 2 more enemy riflemen as they broke cover, attempting to shift positions. Each time, a single, precise round from her TAC-50 found them. Through it all, she remained a study in lethal calm. Her breathing was steady, her movements efficient and stripped of all wasted motion. There was no rush of adrenaline in her eyes, only the clinical precision of a master surgeon at work. Back at the base, in the hushed quiet of the ops center, Colonel Thorne stood over a live drone feed, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the console. The other officers watched in stunned silence. The drone was too high to offer a clear view, but they could see the effects of her work, enemy positions falling silent one by one. "God help me," Thorne muttered under his breath. "It's really her." The enemy's rate of fire began to falter. The relentless pressure on Delta Team eased. They started to push towards safer ground, dragging their wounded. But the mountains were not done with them. From the far side of the ridge, a heavy machine gun opened up, its sustained bursts chewing into the rocks near the team's escape route. It was a new threat, one she couldn't see from her current vantage point. Vance scanned the angles, calculating. To counter it, she would have to move, breaking her perfect cover and exposing herself to any remaining hostiles. Staying put meant watching Delta Team get cut down. The decision was instantaneous. She collapsed the bipod, slung the rifle, and began to move laterally along the treacherous slope. Each step was a negotiation with gravity. Halfway to her new position, another shot cracked past her, close enough to make her ear ring. She dropped into a slide behind a jut of rock, heart pounding but expression unchanged. Slowly, she eased the rifle forward. Through the scope, she found the machine gun nest. She exhaled once, settling her crosshairs on the sliver of exposed neck above the gunner's body armor. One squeeze. The gunner collapsed. A second round took out his spotter before he could even react. The change was immediate. Delta Team surged forward, scrambling to safety. Over the comms, Thorne's voice came through, low and steady. "Keep them moving, Nix 1. You're their lifeline." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Another target emerged. Another shot. Another enemy down. Each pull of the trigger was a quiet verdict, rewriting the fate of the men trapped below. The last of the enemy fighters broke and fled, melting back into the folds of the mountain. Silence, profound and heavy, reclaimed the peaks. On the slope, Elara Vance remained in position, her rifle still trained on the empty pass, scanning for any sign of a final, desperate act. The ground around her was littered with the small, gleaming brass casings of spent rounds, each one a testament to the last 20 minutes of brutal efficiency. Finally satisfied that the threat was gone, she leaned back from the scope. The wind, cold and thin at this altitude, tugged at the loose strands of her hair. Down below, the triumphant voices of Delta Team crackled over the comms, a chaotic but joyous symphony of status updates and casualty reports. Their relief was a tangible thing, a wave of sound washing up the mountainside. She broke down her position with the same calm precision she'd maintained throughout the fight. The TC-50 was disassembled, cleaned, and stowed in its case with a practiced reverence. She began the long, careful descent. At the base of the slope, the QRF team waited. They stared at her as she approached, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and a new, deep-seated awe. They had heard the battle over the radio. Now, they were seeing the warrior who had single-handedly won it. Colonel Thorne was waiting at the perimeter. He didn't speak as she crossed the open ground, just watched her, his face an unreadable mask. She looked exactly as she had when she'd left. Calm, contained, betraying nothing. She stopped in front of him. The noise of the rescued team celebrating filled the air, but in the small space between the colonel and the sergeant, it was utterly still. "You saved them," he said finally. It wasn't a question. Her gaze flicked briefly toward the returning soldiers, then back to him. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Later, in the quiet of his office, the confrontation resumed, but its nature had fundamentally changed. The tension was still there, but it was now laced with a heavy dose of respect from Thorne's side. He slid the thin, heavily redacted file for Operation Nightfall Weaver across the desk. "Tell me," he said, his voice quiet. "Tell me why a hero, a legend, chooses to hide in the shadows of an armory." For the first time, Elara Vance spoke about her past. Her voice was flat, devoid of self-pity, as she recounted the true story of Nightfall Weaver. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she began. "The intel was bad. The timeline was rushed. My real team, was still 2 hours out when the call came in. The SEALs had walked into a trap. I was the closest asset, so I went in alone. No backup. No spate." She paused, her gray eyes looking through him, back into a memory of dust and fire. "The SEALs got out, but my extraction window closed before I could get off that ridge. They couldn't risk a bird for one person. By the time my own team found me, 36 hours later, the kill count was high because it had to be. They just kept coming, her hands resting loosely in her lap, clenched into tight fists. When I finally got back, they debriefed me for 4 hours, sent me to medical, and then told me the mission never existed. My name was removed from the record. My actions were classified into oblivion. They needed a miracle, and when they got one, they buried it because it exposed their mistakes. The final blow landed with a quiet, devastating weight. My unit, they didn't make it home from their next op. The one I should have been on. They were sent in with the same bad intel. Thorn finally understood. The anonymity, the silence, the ghost-like existence wasn't an act of hiding. It was an act of penance. She was punishing herself for surviving, for being the one the system had used and then discarded, while her friends paid the ultimate price for the same institutional failure. She wasn't a ghost because she was afraid of being found. She was a ghost because she believed she no longer deserved to be seen. The tally marks on her rifle weren't trophies of her skill. They were memorials to the cost of command's incompetence. The sterile air of the office felt thick with the weight of her confession. Colonel Thorn looked at the woman sitting opposite him, and for the first time, he saw past the legend of Nix 1. He saw the soldier, Elara Vance, burdened by a history she should never have had to carry alone. The anger he had initially felt in the vault had long since evaporated, replaced by a profound, aching empathy. He rose from his chair and walked over to a small side table where a carafe of water sat. He poured a glass and placed it on the desk in front of her. It was a simple gesture, but in the rigid world of military hierarchy, it was a profound one. It was an offering of comfort, an acknowledgement of her humanity that transcended rank. "You think staying hidden honors them," he said, his voice gentle. It wasn't an accusation. "I think it's the only way to keep from repeating the same mistakes," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "Legends create expectations. Expectations lead to recklessness. People die. Today wasn't a mistake," Thorn countered, leaning on the edge of his desk. "You didn't hesitate. You didn't wait for orders. You acted, and a dozen soldiers are alive because of it. Their families will sleep tonight because of you. That is not a mistake. That is a standard." He let the word hang in the air between them. Standard. It was the core of his own being, the principle by which he lived, and he recognized it in her in its purest, most unforgiving form. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, standard-issue folding knife. He clicked it open, the sound sharp and clean. He walked over to where the TC-50 lay on a side table, brought in from the armory as evidence, and now sitting as a silent witness. "When I saw these marks," he said, gesturing to the long row of tallies, "I thought I was looking at a ledger of death. I was wrong. It's a record of sacrifice." He looked at her, his eyes asking for permission. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Thorn leaned over the rifle. With the tip of the blade, he carefully scored a single, horizontal line at the end of the long row of vertical marks. It was a simple, clean stroke, separating the past from the present. A line of closure. "This chapter ends here," he said quietly. "Whatever comes after is not the same fight." He folded the knife and placed it on the desk. He looked at her, his expression serious, his purpose clear. "You're not going back to the armory, Sergeant. I'm forming a new unit. A small elite cell. A long-range overwatch and reconnaissance team. Official this time. No ghosts, no erased reports. Its purpose won't be to just win fights. Its purpose will be to prevent them. To be the eyes on the ridge that see the trap before anyone walks into it." He paused, letting the offer settle. They'll need someone to teach them, not just how to shoot, but how to see, how to understand the difference between a good shot and the right one. They'll need someone to teach them the standard. Her gray eyes, which had been clouded with the past, slowly cleared. A flicker of something new appeared in them. Not hope, perhaps, but the first glimmer of purpose. "And if I say no," she asked, "then I won't force you," he said, and he meant it. "But the men you saved today are already asking who you are. Rumors will fill the void if you don't. They're calling you the Guardian of the Peak. A myth is already being born, whether you want it or not. The only question is whether you're going to let them write it, or if you're going to write it yourself." He saw the conflict in her face, the pull between the quiet safety of the shadows and the immense burden of the light. "I have one condition," she said finally, her voice regaining its strength. "No myths, no legends, no ghosts, just the standard. My standard. You'll have it," Thorn promised. "Or you'll have my resignation." The sun had not yet crested the jagged peaks, but its first light was beginning to bleed into the pre-dawn sky, painting the clouds in shades of bruised purple and soft gray. On a remote training range, far from the main base, the air was cold enough to make each breath a visible cloud. Alara Vance stood alone in the quiet, her hands tucked into the pockets of her jacket. There was no rifle slung over her shoulder. The legendary TC-50, its story now sealed by a single horizontal line, rested in the vault. Today, the weapon was her knowledge. At precisely 0600 hours, 5 figures emerged from the gloom. They were young, fit, and carried the quiet confidence of soldiers who had already proven themselves in the field. They were the best Thorn had to offer. They formed a loose line in front of her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and respect. The rumors had already spread like wildfire. "They told you why you're here?" Vance asked, her voice cutting through the morning stillness. A young sergeant, his face sharp and intelligent, spoke up. "We're here to learn long-range marksmanship, Sergeant." "No," Vance corrected him, her gaze sweeping over each of them. "You're here to learn how not to mistake a clean shot for a good decision. You're here to learn how to own a piece of ground so completely that the enemy never even knows you're there. You're here to learn how to win a fight by never having to fire a single round." She began to pace in front of them, her boots crunching on the gravel. "Your rifle is the last tool you will ever use. Before that comes your mind, your eyes, your patience, the mountain itself. You will learn to read the wind, not from a flag, but from the way dust moves on a leaf 1,000 meters away. You will learn to measure distance, not with a laser, but with the shadows cast by the sun. You will learn to become so much a part of this landscape that you are nothing more than another rock, another shadow." From the edge of the range, unseen by the recruits, Colonel Thorn watched from the seat of his vehicle. A small, rare smile touched his lips. He saw not a ghost, but a teacher. Not a legend, but a leader. Vance stopped and turned back to her new students. "Your first lesson is this," she said, pointing towards the vast, rugged expanse of the mountains. "That is not your enemy. That is your greatest weapon. Go, disappear into it. I'll find you." As the 5 soldiers moved out, melting into the terrain, Alara Vance stood her ground, a solitary, watchful figure against the rising sun. She was no longer Nyx, the phantom of Nightfall Weaver. She was Sergeant Vance, the guardian of a standard, the beginning of a new kind of legend, one that would be written not in tally marks of death, but in the lives of the soldiers she would teach to come home. Some stories end with medals and parades. Others end in silence, their truth known only by the few who were there. Today, you've walked the ridge with a ghost and stood in the shadow of a legend who chose to be forgotten. Alara Vance's name may never be etched on a monument, but the lives she saved are her true memorial. If her story resonated with you, share it so that legends like hers are never truly lost. Subscribe for more untold stories from the front lines of courage. And in the comments below, let us know what you believe makes a true hero. We read them all. Please comment respect. As the next story loads, remember, the most profound legacies are often the quietest.